Hello and welcome to the first fall 2023 session of Careers Beyond Academia, hosted by Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design. My name is Ellie Arnold, and I'm the training specialist at Stem Cell Network. We're thrilled to relaunch this series for 2023 to 2024. We held 6 sessions last year, and they were very well attended, and we were really happy with how that went. And our goal with this series is to expose as many trainees as possible to different job roles that are available after a degree in the life sciences, and to help them start to understand the qualifications and experience necessary to secure that role. Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design have teamed up to host this series, which has already highlighted a wide variety of careers available after a degree in the life sciences. You can see past Beyond Academia recordings on Stem Cell Network's YouTube channel. And we have new sessions coming out monthly throughout the year. We have many other training events, workshops, and symposiums happening from both organizations as well. So you can check out our websites and social media for the many other opportunities that Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design offer. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletters to be notified of upcoming opportunities, and the links to sign up are provided on our websites. I have a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started with our first speaker. This session will be recorded while the speakers are giving their main presentation. And each speaker will each talk for about 10 to 12 minutes. And then the last half hour will be a joint Q&A or panel discussion style session at the end that will not be recorded. And there we'll start with a couple of questions from me, and then it will be open for the audience to ask questions. So please think about your questions and put them in the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your hand using the raise hand function in Zoom, and you'll be called upon to unmute and to ask your question out loud. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Michael Meave, who has a background in biomedical engineering research and is a principal at Amplitude Ventures, Canada's leading biotechnology and healthcare venture capital fund. Michael is also Managing Director of Amplitude's recently launched venture studio, Preamp. And so, Michael, please go ahead and get us started.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you, Ellie. Very honored to be here and have the opportunity to chat with everyone. And in particular, look forward to the Q&A session later, where we can hopefully address a lot of your interesting questions about sort of career trajectories. But want to use sort of the first 10 minutes or so to sort of orient you around sort of my career trajectory and what my journey was, starting from a very similar point to all of you, sort of doing sort of Ph.D.s, doctoral studies in the life sciences. As Ellie mentioned, I started my career doing a Ph.D. in biomedical engineering. I did that work down, and I'll just sort of advance the slides here at the same time. Oops, there we go. 1 second. I'm just going to orient my screen here. And so sort of started my career in sort of doing my doctoral studies down in Boston, sort of looking at developing protein engineering technologies and genetic engineering technologies, and did my work in a lab that was very entrepreneurial minded and got bit by the entrepreneur's bug, like many in the lab, and quickly started to think about what would it take to translate some of the science that we were working on in the lab into industry, and what are the types of technologies, the types of problem areas, application areas that could really catalyze moving that science out of the academic labs into industry, and ultimately in a way that would try to make an impact in the world and on patient populations and in the clinic. And it was that experience of being an entrepreneur, I think, that really was my guiding light for the rest of my career of how I could sort of continue to make that impact and have my day-to-day be impact on sort of driving those technologies forward. So I have a few slides here to talk through sort of my current role and what I do at Amplitude, sort of the timeline of my career, and sort of some of the activities that are involved on a day-to-day basis in my role. I want to try to sort of highlight sort of opportunities and challenges that I think my role represents, and sort of just general career planning advice as well. Before I'll turn it over to Sonam, the other guest today, to talk about her trajectory. So as Ellie mentioned, I am sort of wear 2 hats in the context of Amplitude. One is as principal on the investment team at Amplitude Ventures, where sort of use my day-to-day to think about how do we identify sort of emerging companies, emerging entrepreneurs, emerging technologies across the country, and thinking about how do we build business strategies and sort of finance those strategies appropriately to accelerate the development, build the teams, and sort of enable those companies to move forward through to developing therapies into clinical trials and making that impact on patients. So that's sort of working with others, those external innovators within our ecosystem. And then the other hat that I wear is as managing director of a subsidiary of Amplitude that we call Preamp. We have a bit of musical branding here, but Preamp is our company creation studio that Ellie mentioned, where we're focused on sort of thinking about how do we map out emerging areas of life science research, where we want to be more proactive in thinking about how do we build companies in those spaces and not waiting for other innovators and entrepreneurs to come to us with their concepts, but rather saying, we think that we could create a lot of impact and a lot of value in the clinic by sort of building a company around this form of technology or in this space. And we'll just go ahead and do that and think about how do we integrate and generate the intellectual property that is required to accelerate that, develop the strategy, and recruit in a team of scientists, of sort of executive management to drive that forward. So again, we're sort of dual hats. The team at Amplitude is about 12. We're based across the country, of offices in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. Preamp, we now have 2 full-time employees entirely sort of acting as in-house entrepreneurs and innovators that are sort of working on these early company creation concepts. They've come through the fellowship program that we run at Preamp that I'll talk about a little bit later as potentially a catalyst. We've now had about 24 sort of leading PhDs, postdocs, MD PhDs from across the country come through our fellowship program. I've had over 500 applicants. And we work with them to teach them about the development of early stage strategy for company creation, and what sort of visions and strategies investors really like to back to build world-class companies. And we view this as a way of sort of educating the next generation of entrepreneurial leader across the ecosystem, across the country. And beyond sort of hiring a sort of subset of those into Preamp, where they're going to be working internally, and we're growing that team to 4 in the next 6 months or so. A number of alumni from the program have gone on to launch their own companies, work in other company creations sort of groups across the country, work in venture capital, move into consulting, work in tech transfer offices across the country. And sort of we look to manage and sort of mediate a lot of those introductions to accelerate that career advancement of this sort of cohort of leaders that we're developing. So again, my background, my training to sort of enable all of this was in the sciences, in particular from an engineering sort of discipline. I like to think that I was always sort of inspired by thinking about how do we bring quantitative frameworks to the biological sciences. And I'm certainly a believer in thinking about like what we cannot build, we do not understand. And so focus my sort of PhD research and thesis work on thinking about this domain of synthetic biology, where you could construct and sort of use our abilities in DNA synthesis to sort of drive our understanding of biology. Here we go. So high-level timeline of what I went through. Did my undergrad at McGill back in Montreal, where I am presently. Then immediately went down to do my doctorate in biomedical engineering that I've spoken about already. Launched a company out of that work with a postdoctoral fellow in the lab, where sort of the combination of our respective technologies we believe could sort of accelerate application areas in sort of the life science translational aspect. That got me introduced to the venture capital and company creation ecosystem in Boston, and provided me an opportunity to spend the second half of my decade down in Boston working at Flagship Pioneering, which at the time was not as well known as it is now, due to its role in the founding of Moderna Therapeutics, but was really captivated about the opportunity to work with the team to think about sort of big platform opportunities, big technologies, and conceiving, building, and launching companies from scratch within the platform that Flagship provided. And so I spent my time there thinking about launching companies such as Kaleido Biosciences, which was in the human clinical microbiome space, and how we could modulate that with glycans. Was involved in founding the company Sana Biotechnologies, where we're thinking about advancing sort of novel approaches to target gene delivery vectors within different physiologies of our body. was involved in launching a company called Generate Biomedicines. We're thinking about the marriage between our capabilities in generative AI that were emerging on the tech side, but how to pull that into thinking about biological therapeutic design as well. And then a company called Tessera Therapeutics, where we sort of unlocked a class of proteins that we coined as gene writers, and thinking about their ability to write genetic material directly into the genome in a site-specific high-fidelity way. Sort of at the tail end of my time there, I started sort of realizing the sort of capabilities of the Canadian life science ecosystem, both in academia and in industry. Was always speaking to academics around the world, but was inspired by the fact that I was probably disproportionately speaking to Canadian academics on a per capita basis. Was doing a lot of the work at these early stage companies with contract research organizations in the Canadian ecosystem. And it really got me thinking about the potential to sort of similarly build world-class companies within Canada. And so in 2019, made a return home, sort of joined the founding team of Amplitude Ventures and made a return home to help launch the fund. So we launched our first fund in 2019. We just launched our second fund earlier this year. So I've been operating as both that investor and sort of leading the industrialization, professionalization of our company creation efforts at Amplitude that led to the launch of Preamp earlier this year. So my role as a principal and sort of the general trajectory when we think about sort of getting involved in sort of investing is my background, and sort of many people on my team, almost as a prerequisite, have backgrounds in doctorals in the life sciences or an MD, and often have a certain amount of work experience, either in business development and tech transfer, et cetera, but starting to understand the financials of the industry. Sort of don't need to talk through some of the sort of bullet points here, but sort of salary ranges are those. And what I do is thinking about developing those relationships with leading innovators, entrepreneurs, identifying the most promising ones, companies and entrepreneurs, running that deep diligence to understand what risks exist about advancing that technology, and then negotiating the terms of investment. So sort of what do we think the value of that company is, and what do we think the value of that company could be? And then sort of once we make an investment, spend a lot of my time actually overseeing and working with management to ensure that the companies can be built and continue to accelerate along that initial vision. And so that's done in a board capacity where we sort of advise and sort of provide that feedback to the CEO and sort of the executive management of the company. So key skills to enable this are critical thinking, problem solving, team and sort of people management, and business strategy as well, right? So when I think about business strategy, it's how do I think about the critical data that a company is producing around the science that really sort of provides additional conviction and initial value around the company. Other careers that I considered along that journey was, as I mentioned, being a startup founder and doing that on my own, but also consulting and thinking about how to sort of advise companies in a similar capacity. So on a day-to-day, sort of speeding up because I'm realizing the time is short here, but typical activities, sort of, it's very close to science. We're, I guess, what you could call like a deep tech investor, where we're really looking at very early stage science for the most part. And so there's a lot of diving into scientific literature, speaking to academics from around the world to understand the critical questions and risks that need to be addressed. We don't need to know the answers to those questions, but we need to understand what the unknowns are and what the risks are related to those novel technologies so that we could then identify the people around the world that really know how to evaluate those problems and bring them in to help us assess and quantify the risks associated with those and how to finance behind them. Because sometimes they're engineering risks, and if we sort of try 10 different solutions, we think we can solve it. But sometimes it's a pure biology risk, and who knows that the biology will read out, and trying to sort of gauge our level of understanding of that risk. Additionally, as I mentioned, we regularly meet with company management to understand the emerging challenges that are always cropping up, because you have a plan at day zero and then everything gets ripped up as soon as you hit battle. And so we're constantly sort of rethinking the strategy and sort of continuing to evolve how we sort of think about sort of shifting the tactics and how to grow these companies. Additionally, like critical points that I'll sort of highlight additionally in sort of the next slide as well is we're always thinking about how to sort of synthesize information, whether that's information about sort of new developments from a strategy, new data from a company that we've invested in, or the diligence that we're doing on the science, and how to synthesize that into very concise presentations to update our internal team. we look at over 100 different investment opportunities over the course of the year. And so each of these concepts needs to be very clearly communicated of what we believe are the pros and cons. And that skill of synthesizing very complex, often ambiguous information into sort of a clearly communicated logical framework is really important for this role. So why it's important is I feel very fortunate that I get to sit at a point of playing a critical role in selecting and accelerating the development of technologies that can improve human health. And I think this is something that everyone on my team is very passionate about, and certainly differentiates people that operate in the investment sphere of investing, not to put them down, but in tech, where maybe you're thinking about how to drive additional ad revenue, where my job is really thinking about how to accelerate the improvement of human health through the development of new therapeutics, medical devices, et cetera. I enjoy this because I'm a geek and I always get to learn, and I get to work with sort of brilliant, like-minded colleagues with diverse backgrounds and a similar passion. Challenges associated with my role is, I guess, always worrying about what you don't know and what you haven't thought of, because you've never thought of everything. There's always going to be risk ahead, and I call these like the unknown unknowns. And so those are always at the back of my mind of thinking about what could happen that we haven't really thought about and how to plan for these unknowns. In terms of future career trajectory and what like my career might be looking like in the next 5 years, well, there's always an opportunity for me to step into an operating role and take executive leadership at some of the companies that we create or that we're financing in certain situations, or sort of advancing into a partner role where my role could shift a little bit to think more about broader portfolio strategy at Amplitude and how do we sort of interact with our investors, which are often sort of the large pension funds across the country who sort of invest their capital in us to sort of deploy into these emerging companies. And so lastly, last slide for today, and I know I'm a little over time, apologies. Just maybe a few nuggets of advice on clear career planning. I've highlighted this before, but really think about if this is a direction you want to go, whether it's consulting, investing, business development, work on developing your strategic thinking and how you present the logical framework you use to analyze a problem versus just jumping and saying what you think the solution should be. So providing that sort of process that you solve a problem by and being able to articulate that clearly is almost as important as the solution you get to when sort of interacting with people, interacting with investors, and interacting with a team, because that's where people can start to provide that advice and feedback on that process. I'd also say what I see a lot from people coming from academia is striving for perfection and sort of having that final publication ready sort of figure. In industry, we try to work quickly and we want feedback all the time. So don't be sort of focused on presenting the perfect, but rather present the process for feedback and get used to frequent input on the progress that you're making. Lastly, network. I like to sort of advise people who are coming from academia to approach learning about your career trajectory the same way you would about selecting a research project, where sort of you'd never choose a research project before sort of reading dozens of papers in that domain. But when you're thinking about your career, people are now your information source, right? To learn about what those career opportunities are, what their career trajectories are versus papers when you're thinking about a research project. And then lastly, I just want to highlight to do what excites you. That's always been part of my guiding light as well. If you identify things that you're excited and passionate about, those will ultimately, and that will ultimately be the best motivator to succeed in those roles. So with that, I'll pause and turn it back to Ellie. Sorry for going over a few minutes.
Oh, no problem at all. Thank you so much. That was a really informative talk. And as a reminder, we'll be taking questions for both talks after our next speaker. So Michael will stick around and be here for the Q&A session. And even as our next speaker is talking, you can start putting your questions in the Q&A box, and then I'll read them out during the panel discussion. So I'd like to welcome our second speaker, Robyn Butt. Robyn received her master's in biology from Memorial University of Newfoundland and joined Morphocell Technologies in 2021, which is a regenerative medicine company focused on the development and commercialization of stem cell therapies and engineered tissues targeting liver failure. Robyn, please go ahead and share your screen and I'll hand it over to you. Oh, and you're on mute still.
Great, thank you for that. Okay. So thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. So as Ellie mentioned, I'm a junior scientist. I'm currently located at Morphocell Technologies. which is in Montreal, Quebec. So I'll talk a little bit about Morphocell at the end of my presentation. But for now, I'll talk sort of about my career and where I am right now. So I have a Bachelor's of Science in Biology, as well as a Master's of Science in Biology. And so as you can see from my career timeline, I'm very early in my career. So I completed my Bachelor's of Science at Memorial University, which is located in St. John's, Newfoundland. So during that time, I studied a variety of topics in biology, but ultimately I really enjoyed molecular biology and cell biology. And then after finishing my bachelor's, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I knew that I had an interest in laboratory research, so I sort of wanted to get my feet wet. So I decided to do my honors, which included a thesis project. And this was sort of a great way to get introduced into lab research. I was, paired up with a PhD student and given sort of a little side project of her project to work on. So with her guidance, I learned a lot of different techniques in the lab, as well as, writing my thesis. And I found this very challenging, but I also found it very rewarding. So after finishing that, I decided that I would like to do my master's. So I did my master's again at Memorial University. And my master's thesis was focused on the gut microbiota in fish and how that regulates appetite. So during this time, I did a lot of molecular biology work. I did a lot of DNA extractions, qPCR. So it was very repetitive. So you sort of become the master of those techniques. And then I also had the opportunity, to do a little bit of collaboration, which was great, as well as writing a literature review, which was published. So this was a great experience as well. And then after finishing my master's, I wasn't sure, again, what I wanted to do. I thought, okay, maybe I can do a PhD, or maybe I can try industry. And never having any experience in industry, I decided I'd like to do that and see how it would go and if I would enjoy it. So that's sort of what has led me here to Morphocell. So I started as a laboratory technician. So that transition from academia to industry, I realized right away there was, some clear differences. One of them being sort of the structure. So I felt there was a lot more structure. I had, training on everything that I was to do, all the tasks, a lot more documentation, that sort of thing, which I personally liked. I really enjoy organization. So right away I was hooked. So currently at Morphocell, I'm now a junior scientist. I'm also involved in some of the training here at Morphocell. So during my master's degree, I had the opportunity to be a teaching assistant, which I really enjoyed. So when the opportunity came up to do sort of some training, I thought that would be something I could enjoy as well. Okay, so a quick look at exactly what I do in my role. So some typical background would be, your master's in science or PhD in science, particularly for what I do in molecular cellular biology. The potential salary range, of course, can be dependent on which company you're working for example, but this is typically what you'll see. So what I do in a sentence is assist a team in the planning, design, and execution of laboratory projects, as well as providing training in the technical skills and assays. So some key skills for this role, of course, would be, your basic lab skills. So pipetting, some lab maintenance, my molecular biology assays. I do cell culture work, data analysis, teaching and training. I'm involved in SOP writing as well as the experimental design. So some other careers that I considered, as I mentioned, I considered going into academia. I considered sort of staying as a lab technician, and I also considered teaching because I enjoyed that during my grad studies. So as I mentioned, some typical activities here I've already mentioned in the previous slide. Also, I am involved in quality control of documents. So in industry, you'll see a lot of documents, as I mentioned, and sort of looking at documents that are completed by my colleagues and making sure things are processed and completed as they should be. Writing detailed proposals and data analysis plans, as well as organizing and assigning lab tasks. So being part of the training, I'm sort of managing those trainees as well as the interns as well that come in. And then the lab maintenance. Okay, so some highlights and challenges about the role. So I believe my role is really important because I help to assist lead scientists in projects and experiments to achieve the company's objectives and goals, as well as I provide high quality training to new and current employees and interns. I really enjoy my role because I enjoy being a part of a team of individuals that we're all, working together to achieve one common goal, which can be quite different from academia. In my experience, especially in grad school, you're working on, your individual project. There may be some collaboration here and there, but it's not so much a team goal that you're working towards. I enjoy that my day-to-day tasks are different, and I'm also a big nerd, so I really enjoy learning on the job. So some challenges associated with this role would be, managing the various tasks and workloads that we have. So organization is definitely key. Providing individuals with training best suited for their learning. So of course, not everybody's going to learn the same. So I have to come up, with different ways of learning, teaching people. And as well, I have it here as, something I enjoy, but it's also something that's very challenging is learning on the job. It has that added pressure for sure. So some future career trajectories and opportunities for this role would be to further my data analysis and data presentation skills, learn new assays and techniques. So this would help me to sort of advance my career into a more senior scientist role, as well as develop the training programs a bit further. So some career planning advice I would have is to, sort of get your feet wet. You don't know what you'll like or what you won't like unless you try it. So internships and volunteering are a great way to do that. Here at Morphocell, for example, we have internships in which, you'll go through the same training that employees would go through. So it's a great way to see how you like industry, as well as attending conferences and seminars and networking events. So it's a great way to see what's out there for work and get to talking with people. And then don't underestimate, of course, your soft skills. So, tools such as graphing and presentation, the ability to communicate, work well with others, to read and understand articles can all be very helpful in your career development. So I just want to finish with talking a little bit about Morphocell. So we are a preclinical regenerative medicine company. So currently we are in the process of developing a platform based on allogeneic stem cell derived engineered tissues for organ replacement. So our initial target is acute and chronic liver failure, which unfortunately currently only relies on liver transplantation, which of course is limited. So Morphocell's solution is the ReLiver. So this is a product that we are developing, which will be implantable with minimal invasive surgery. It's fully functional on implantation and easily removed once the patient's liver regenerates. It won't require any immunosuppression due to the encapsulation of the liver organoids that will be in the implant, and it can be cryopreserved for on-demand use. So once the patient is in liver failure, it can be shipped out. So there's lots of, exciting things happening here at Morphocell. We're still preclinical, as I mentioned, a lot of research and development happening here. So lots of great opportunities for career development. So with that, I'd just like to thank you all for your attention, and thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, Robyn. And on behalf of Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design, I'd like to thank again both of our speakers today, Robyn Butt and Michael Mee.